Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video with me, Shruti. You're watching Living Our Ascension. So today I want to speak about a question actually that was asked. There was a comment on a previous video that I made, and somebody asked me, what would you suggest when it comes to overcoming your other side or your shadow self? And I thought that this was a very important question, and thank you very much for this question. And I want to address it today. And I want to address it in a way that I take you through some sacred principles as well when it comes to the divine feminine. So I'm going to be speaking about the process of how you can do this on your own, the process of embracing your shadow. And we're going to even speak about whether the shadow even exists or not, what that means. So I hope to touch upon all of these topics today, and also take you through some sacred principles of the, especially related to the divine feminine, so that, once they become familiar with us, these different phases and stages, and I've just given these different stages different names so that we're better able to identify them as they're happening. And through the understanding of these sacred principles, which are really quite simple, they're nothing too fancy, nothing too difficult, and through their understanding, then hopefully we're able to, when it's happening in our own life, we're able to identify it and we know exactly what's happening. So if that's something that you'd like to hear, then please stay tuned and watch this video. As you can see behind me, I'm in this, this sort of place that looks a little bit scary. And I thought that, what a perfect place. I was just crossing this. I didn't actually intend to come here, but as always, spirit surprises you and life surprises you. And brings you exactly the things that you need for the moment. So I saw this and I just had to stop, and that's why I'm filming here. So the first thing that I want to say about the shadow is that you might have heard in the spiritual community, some people will talk about the fact that that we have a shadow, and they'll be all about the shadow work and doing this inner work process. And others will just say that the shadow doesn't exist at all. And which one is the truth really? And the thing is that at a different level, they're both the truth. So at one level, it's true that the shadow doesn't exist, because when it comes to spirit, when we are all light, and that's how we're birthed, and everything within creation is made of light. So there is no such thing as the shadow as such at that level. But the thing is that now we are here in this physical body, and we are matter. So at this level of our being, when we reside within the third dimension, there's always a part of us that is growing, and I always, everything comes down to this, so I always mention it in my videos. But we are always becoming, while we are always whole, we are always light, at the same time we are always growing and becoming. We are the soul that evolves as well. We are spirit that is eternal and always exists in its wholeness, but at the same time we are also the soul that has, goes through many lives and the process of death and rebirth, and keeps accumulating wisdom. So at one level, the soul always is, there can be no death of the soul as such. Even though the soul may die, your body might perish, and but as such, if you think about it, there is no death, because energy can't be created or destroyed, and it'll just change. You will move from one dimension to another. You will just change. So both of these are true, and the thing is that when we come to a certain level of our mastery, then the way that we see life is, we don't see it as we don't really see it as there being a shadow, because everything is just light is expressing itself, and the soul is just evolving, and that's basically how you just see it. But the thing is that in order to really anchor that state of being, it's quite handy and useful for us to do this inner work. Inner work, we will always do it anyway. It's just that we change our perspective and the way that we look at certain things. But I feel that if you are identifying with this, you're resonating, let's say, not identifying, but if you're resonating with the idea of a shadow, then you can really look at doing some shadow work. And because when the soul is calling you to it, usually that's when we resonate with something. That's when we will have a question like this, about the shadow, wondering what it's all about, wondering how we can heal it or embrace it. So I want to address that today, and basically, along the lines of what I was just saying, there is nothing to be healed within you as well at one level. But at the same time, the first level is all about coming into the consciousness, knowing of what those patterns are that we hold within. So there's nothing wrong with those patterns. They're not negative. The shadow is not negative, but it's just about knowing what is there, what we are creating. So it's just about becoming conscious. So I've divided this into 3 different stages. If you want to do some shadow work on your own at home, there's 3 stages that you can look at. And the first one, I've just named it taking ownership or taking responsibility. And the next stage is unconditional acceptance. And the third stage is right action. So the first stage is taking responsibility, which means that we need to be able to see what those patterns are that we are creating in our life. So and this is actually very easy. Once you start doing it, all of life will show you what those patterns are. And a good way to really do this is to if there have been any recent disappointments in your life, on a weekly basis, like a couple of times a week, you can just sit down and see what that is. You can write it down, or you can, however you would like to do it. But just become conscious of what those emotions are that you have been feeling, maybe from other people. Let's say, somebody's been expressing anger towards you, and they're just angry for no reason, or they're, abusing you even. And we can often think, that, for example, if you were a child and you were abused, and you might wonder, how was it my fault? This is nothing that I'm holding within. I was just a child and I didn't have any evil agendas. But, when we are birthed within this body, there's many fears that we can hold. So that fear is still is within you. That's why it was expressed from the outside through another person. So it has to do with the energy that we hold. And we will always, constantly be attracting situations and people in our lives that mirror that to us. So look at in your week, what those negative, so-called negative, or let's just say unpleasant emotions are that were that came up within you, that sprung within you when somebody did something, or when you didn't get something you wanted from life. This can be something long-term, or it can be something small that's recent, and just make a list of that, and then you will begin to see what those qualities are, what those fears are that you hold within. And this is the first stage of just becoming conscious. So this in itself does a lot, once we become conscious of what that is. And sometimes, we might think that, oh, I know what I'm fearful of. And but when you actually sit down and do it, you might be surprised at, how many things you find that come up. And this is fine, because it's all just fear at the end of the day. Even if you have, let's say, 10 different negative emotions, at the end of the day they're all fear. So we don't have to think like there's something massively wrong with us. It's really just about gathering all of those pieces of ourselves and becoming aware. And then, so the first stage was this, about taking responsibility of our patterns, becoming conscious of them. The next stage is about unconditional acceptance of ourselves. So once you become aware of what these patterns are, and especially you will find that, we have certain patterns that we have, these patterns, they always spring from childhood, because it might be something small that happened to us as a child, and that fear was still within us. We suppressed it, and it wasn't really allowed to let go. And then we kind of just kept creating that energy, and it built and built, and it became something bigger in our lives. And then, in different ways it'll express itself in our lives. And you'll see this when you actually sit down and make lists, or center within. You will see that there will be recurring themes. So once you become conscious of this and you know what those are, then the next stage is to fully accept yourself for it. We don't want to just blame other people for everything that happens in our lives and blame life. We want to take responsibility, but that doesn't mean blaming ourselves. That doesn't mean holding hatred or anything negative towards ourselves. And we need to then come into the stage of knowing ourselves as a child, just like a toddler. Is so curious and wants to explore everything, and one minute he's like running, and the next second he's like falling. And we don't judge a toddler, we don't get angry with them. An adult will look at that as something that's adorable. A child is just running and falling, and basically the child is growing up, exploring, becoming who he or she came here to be. And we need to be able to embrace that child part of ourselves that never grew up, that we are still holding as the inner child that's fearful. So that's the next stage, that bring that love for yourself again and again. Say words of affirmation as well, that I accept, I love myself fully, I accept you fully, to that child within. So that's the next stage. Then the third stage is right action. So after we have taken responsibility, we've become conscious of our patterns, then we have also accepted ourselves and we love ourselves anyway fully. Then the next thing is to then change that in the world, create like a new cycle. So how do we create a new cycle? Is by taking new actions. So when we become fully conscious of all of these patterns that we have had our whole lives, then what happens is that there becomes a tendency to notice it in the now. So for example, if I've held certain fears my whole life and I know what they are because I've done all of this inner work, and I've spent time doing it and devotion doing it on a regular basis, then when it's happening to me the next time, in the moment, I will be able to catch it, because this whole process makes you conscious within the moment. And that is the process of our self-mastery and becoming a master, becoming conscious. So once you become conscious, then you won't just be reacting to life, So gradually we stop reacting to life and we start responding to life. And there's a difference between reaction and responding. Reaction is just, something that feels like it's outside of our control, like somebody else is controlling us, almost like you're a puppet, and just life, whatever happens in your life, you're just, reacting to it always. You feel like you have no control over your own life and the circumstances that are created. And it can be the same within relationships. People treat you a certain way and you just kind of fall within that dynamic. You just, somebody's angry at you and they scream at you, you just scream back, and it's always like a pattern like that. That is just reacting, whereas response is when we are one with the breath. So, for example, for a master, it's not as if, when we become fully ascended in our bodies, it doesn't mean that we don't feel any fear. We will feel the same fears, because fear has a purpose. So for example, all of these so-called negative emotions or unpleasant emotions that we might feel, like sadness, anger, betrayal, whatever it might be, they have a certain purpose. They are here to protect us for our survival, and they have that's the reason that we feel it in the first place. But what we do with that is up to us. That is what becoming conscious is about. So for a master, if somebody's coming and just shouting at them, they will not just shout back and just react within that moment. If they have claimed that, then they will be more about just centering themselves, being with the breath, and being able to take the right action, knowing what the right thing to say or do is within that, and not just being on autopilot. So their actions comes from a higher source, from their own self, their higher self, and that is what right action is. This is the masculine principle within us, of carrying out divine will, of carrying out the actions of the divine, something that is aligned with our I am presence, with our higher self, because the I am presence is our masculine part, the spirit part of us. So that is, through this process, when we keep doing this, and this is not a one-day affair where you just do it, over one issue and that happens. It's, imagine how many times you have created the same old patterns before that were unhealthy. So we need to take the right actions as well through this 3-step process that I've just explained. And that's when it becomes something that's very alive within us. In the moment we will be able to switch it on instantly when we feel something unpleasant within us. We won't always be responding. Those moments will be rare, and more often than not we will be able to respond, and it just becomes a more automatic process. So the next principle that I want to speak about when it comes to shadow work is also the principle of cycles and phases. And in all of my videos, in one way or another, I do mention this, because everything basically comes down to this, is that we are at the same time, we are spirit and we are matter, and we are spirit and we are the soul. So spirit is the part of us that is always whole, is always complete, is light. But at the same time, we are always also evolving as a soul. For example, the soul goes through the process of death and rebirth. Your body might perish in this lifetime, you might die, and then you're born as something else again. So there's this cycle of death and rebirth that happens as a soul. But at the same time, there's actually at one level, at a higher level, at a spirit level, there is no death, because it's just light that is expressing itself, that's going through that process. But light always is. It's just the soul is just changing from one form to another, just like energy cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes from one form to another. So the soul just goes through that process, and through that gathers wisdom that is held then within creation. So at one level, you might be going through that process of growth, and at the same time you are always whole. So that's why cycles are really important. And when it comes to the process of self-mastery, embracing the fact that things come back, have a way of coming back. So many people think that once you become fully enlightened, you're not going to feel fear, or you're always going to be in this state, in this Zen state. And that's not what it is. It's like I described before, you will be feeling the same things. It's just that you won't be reacting, you will be responding in a conscious manner. So with that, we need to accept that while there's a part of us we are always perfect anyway from in our wholeness, but there's always a part of us that is growing, evolving, just like a child. So you might find that even at a higher level in our self-mastery, there's always going to be things that are there where we have some growth to do, because there's new expansion, there's something else that we have our focus on, there's something else that will be growing in our life, something else we want to create in our life, something new completely. So there'll be new experiences. So obviously there's going to be that sense of letting go of something that's not required anymore. It can be something simple, just like your job. There's something that you've already created, and now it's time to let that go, and now it's time to create something else that you're passionate about. So life is like that. It's just that when we make such a big deal about it, and we have such a huge identification with whatever that physical thing is, then we have a difficult time letting it go, and because we think that it is us in some way, but it's not. So this is how life is created, through cycles and phases. And I want you to imagine, the sacred principle of the sacred rose. So like if you imagine a rose, it has many different layers. There's the outside petals, and then you go in, and then you go further in. And this is how the female body is also set up, like the female sexual organs as well. This is how it is. So what I want to say with regards to this is that once you are on the Ascension timeline, you will be experiencing these cycles in a much more in a faster way than before, and then the masses, then all of the people around you. So there'll be more and more cycles. You'll be going through more cycles in your lifetime than maybe just in 1 year than people go through in their whole life. And this is why there will be more points when you will feel more vulnerable, when you will see more parts of you that are recognized, that parts of you that you don't recognize, that are unfamiliar. And that's the thing to know then, that's what's happening, because usually, the biggest thing that we have is just this fear of the unknown. And when we don't know what we are getting into, or what's blossoming from within us, that's when we get scared. But once you know that, every time that there's this fear that comes up and this unknown feeling, it just means that there's something new that's birthing. Once you realize that within simplicity, then it won't be a constant state of fear all the time. And especially because you will be going through many different changes. Like I said, these cycles, they just get more and more faster. So that's because there's faster progress, on your spiritual journey. You're also growing faster. You're becoming an expanded being. You are here in this life to claim more parts of yourself and not just live, knowing yourself as this physical body that doesn't have, anything. There's just so many parts of us. There's so many dimensions that exist within creation, and the process of self-mastery is to claim all of these different parts of us and anchor them within the body, within our consciousness, and to live as the full human, in our full human potential. So if we take the example of somebody who goes through a disease, like a normal person, when they have like an ailment or a disease, they might just go to like a regular doctor, and these pills, they might just suppress those symptoms, and then they can carry on with their lives. They go to work and they're doing whatever they were doing, with some difficulty, but they're still able to do it. And if you constantly compare yourself, to something like that, then that's not a healthy thing. Because if you have chosen like a more holistic way of living, which tends to happen once you're on the Ascension timeline, you can't escape it, because you are aligned with like the natural cycles. That's the only way we get into the Ascension timeline, truly on the Ascension timeline. And so even the solutions that come to you, what the opportunities that life brings to you, will have a more natural inclination. And things that happen naturally, for that we need to go through the process of death and rebirth completely, completely surrendering to it. And so, for example, if you're comparing yourself to that and you just want to get back to work and just keep doing in the world, and not allowing yourself that process of regeneration, and not honoring that, or maybe you're labeling yourself saying I'm slow, or why is it that I'm always I'm not getting ahead in life in some way, in those more physical ways that the world society tends to consider successful. So whether that's with regards to a disease, relationships, or your career, whatever it might be, the thing is that once you're on the Ascension timeline, there's a different agenda that takes over. So anytime that you're going through these doubts about yourself, especially in comparison to other people or how it looks out in the physical, imagine this symbol of the sacred rose. Like I was explaining, there's these different layers of the sacred rose. Just like if you imagine a rose, there's an outer layer, and then it keeps going within, and the more closer you get to the center, the actual the more exact the frequency becomes, whatever the essence is that you're moving into. And in your life you will go through many of these cycles, again and again, whereas somebody else might just go through one or two slowly throughout their whole lifetime, whereas for us it looks completely different. So it's important that while you're going through this, to know your perfection within it, and to know that it's not that there's something wrong with you, or you need more healing than others, or we can have this within us that I always need to be healed, I need healing. And as long as you're saying that, you're reverberating with it, I need healing, you will never be fully healed. You will never feel complete. As long as you think that I'm incomplete, and you keep saying that to the universe, you will never feel complete, even though that's what you are and always will be. So in order to become complete, you have to know that you are complete. That's the only way that we experience completeness within form. And then now I want to move to the last one, the principle of sacred vulnerability. This is just something I'm calling it. So again, when it comes to, especially dealing with other people who are, not embracing the same timeline, oftentimes, you'll find that you're more vulnerable than others, and your vulnerable side will be on display more. So, let's say within relationships, or because you're an open person, you've opened up a certain level of being, and there's that emotional, transparency, not just with your emotions but your feelings, that true feeling, the state of divine love. That's just how we feel for everyone, and how we are in the world, just flows from that. And give others a chance. This is something that Spirit is saying to me recently a lot, and is coming up for all of us, that give others a chance to accept you as you are, even if you're different, even if you're more vulnerable, your vulnerable side comes up more often than others. Your vulnerable sides are expressed in the world more often than others. There's a reason for this. There's a higher reason. So for example, even though, let's say, you've gone through a certain level of initiation and self-mastery, but you meet others who are just living their life, maybe they're not even conscious at all, and these might be people you can't that you will always have an association with, like family members or whoever it might be, but you find that often it's like often you are more vulnerable than them, or it looks like there's things that need to be healed, and others can judge you for it also when they don't have this understanding, when they haven't gone through this sacred process of inner work and coming into themselves. And it's really important to hold that space, to hold your royalty, because we are all daughters and sons of Source, of God. And vulnerability actually is nothing that has to do with weakness. It's actually the strongest that we can be, because when the state of vulnerability, what it means is just to be fully open to life. That doesn't mean just allowing anything in us, but being fully open to everything. And then from that state, we can be discerning about what we choose and what we don't choose, but we don't have preconceived notions. Everything is like life is an open book. Every opportunity, every moment, we are fully open with our hearts to it. And it's the same with people. So when you are interacting with people, it's important to be yourself, to be in that open-hearted space, and also to express yourself as you are. And allow others, this chance to, that even if you're very different, even if you're expressing yourself a certain way, that they can accept you as you are. Because often the people that you attract also, once you come into a certain level of being, it will be, you become a portal of light, and you become this vortex that just, it becomes about the, what's the word that I'm looking for? The integration of different particles and coming into their wholeness. So different people who need certain codes, who need to hear a certain thing. Sometimes what we need is not in a wow, in a way that you wow other people. Sometimes it'll be a reflection, where you show them a vulnerable side of you, and maybe they don't even accept it. Maybe they're triggered by it, or they judge you for it. But that's something that they needed to see for their soul journey. Something that triggers something within them. Maybe at a later point in their life they realize it, or they don't. That's not really up to us to get into all of that. But our job is to just be in that royalty and to accept this vulnerability, this constant growth that we go through, and the many things that it entails as well, and especially when it involves others. And when you give others a chance to love and accept you as you are, even if it's something different, it allows them an opportunity also to open their hearts to something that is different, to just love, beyond even their understanding. Maybe they can't understand something, maybe they don't understand what you're all about, why you are choosing what you're choosing, but to just love anyway. And there's nothing that is more sacred than that, the opportunity to do that. And of course, to do that for yourself first. We need to be able to love ourselves in the moment, no matter what we're going through. So yeah, basically, I hope that through these sacred principles, that this understanding hits home. I'll just repeat them very quickly, just the names, not everything. That, if you are, when you go through the process of coming into yourself, and you of embracing sides of you that have not fully surfaced, and again the shadow, like, I began the video by saying, does the shadow even exist? And in truth it doesn't, because once we start accepting ourselves just as we are, and we are in this state of royalty, knowing ourselves as perfect in the moment, even though we might be going through certain things, let's say, because the body, the physical body, the emotional body will go through certain detox processes. So of course there will be some symptoms, and others around you may or may not understand this, but we always need to be in full acceptance of this ourselves first, and that is what creates oh, it's freezing. So some of the things that I spoke about in this video, the first one was that if you want to work with your inner patterns, then the first thing is to accept them, to take ownership. The second is to love them unconditionally. The third is to take the right action. And then the second thing I spoke about was the principles and of cycles and phases, which is, the aspect of the divine feminine. It's always constantly, it's all about cycles, just like women, they have their periods, and they go through the death and rebirth process. Within that, if you're going through your period, let's say, and there's this death and rebirth of the egg process, and you think that, oh my god, I'm dying, and if it's so dramatic, then imagine how your life will be. So it's to know that that process will always happen, and that is the state of grace, when we can apply that to all of life. Then the third thing is sacred vulnerability, and accepting our role as being the initiators of others as well as ourselves, and just holding this dignity and royalty always. So that's it from me, you guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and let me know in the comments below if you found it helpful, especially if you try any of these exercises. And remember that it takes a while as well. Then the other thing that I wanted to say was that as many of you might know, I offer inner child work services, and this is like a really involved, from this video you can see how in depth this process goes. And this program that I have, where I work with you through Skype sessions, is deeply involved, and helps us not just to embrace these parts of us that are let's say uncomfortable or negative, so-called negative, but we actually come into what we are through this, because we claim parts of ourselves that we didn't know of, these different dimensional levels. So yeah, have a look at those services if you would like some assistance with this process, and subscribe to this channel if you would like more videos like this. And it's freezing now, so I'm just going to leave and I hope that you have a really, really wonderful day and week.